that's one of the things that is, I know that you two deal with this, that like one of the hardest things about telling people about this stuff is that it is just so goofy and dumb.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't make any sense. It has two modes, and they are goofy and gut-wrenchingly horrifying.
This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, who spent years tracking the far right in their safe spaces. In this show we talk about them and about the wider reactionary forces feeding them and feeding off them. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply. So welcome back to I Don't Speak German, the podcast that does the things that you know that it does, because you listen to it, probably. And I'm Jack Graham, and I'm here with Daniel Harper as usual. And Daniel, say hello to the little girls and boys and everybody else.
And the little boys and girls and non-binary folks, non-binary
and everybody
folks,
else.
absolutely.
I said everybody else.
No, I'm here. I hear you. I just don't want to, don't want to yada yada the non-binary folks. But hello to all those people.
You're absolutely right. I did yada yada, and I shouldn't have done that. And we are very lucky and happy and honored to have with us special guest on the show, Craig Johnson, host of 15 Minutes of Fascism. Hi, Craig. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing about as you might expect for a person living in the United States right now.
Yeah, there is that, isn't there? There is that. You try
I don't know.
to be.
I have my health. I'm fine, honestly.
Yeah, you try to be sunny with people, and then you suddenly remember. Oh yeah, of course, I forgot.
Personally, the way this comes up for me is every time I'm like talking to a therapist or something, and I'm like, oh yeah, I have these anxiety things that I deal with, and then my therapist is like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I study fascism for a living.
So the plot dilutes, I think this thing.
Yeah, they're like, well, I've literally had a therapist be like, have you considered not doing that?
Yeah.
Daniel, I think
any thoughts on that?
I have as well. I've literally had that experience.
Oh, I'd assumed you did.
Yeah, this was before I started the podcast. I was briefly in therapy for other things, and I was like, another thing that might be causing this anxiety is, I listen to like 6 hours of fascist podcasts every day. And she was like, oh, well.
I think I have a clue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I'm at the point now where, people like the lady that brings the post in the morning, she'll say, hi, morning, how are you? And, I'll literally sort of grab her by the lapels, and it'll be, do you realize that Britain's on course for a hung parliament with Reform as the biggest party? And, it's rough. It's rough.
Oh, yeah. God, I have friends in various EU countries who are like, yeah, it's nice to not be in the United States. And I'm like, okay, AfD is the second biggest party in Germany. Like,
yep.
What do you guys think is going to happen?
You, as you point out in your book, which we will get around to talking about, listeners, a party literally descended from Mussolini's original fascist party is currently in power in Italy. So, yeah. That's one of the things that I really appreciated about the book, actually. And I know I'm not introducing it properly, but very early on, you take a sort of a whirlwind tour of all the most significant, I suppose, fascist groupings, fascist movements, parties, not only in the United States, but then around the world, in Europe and India and stuff like that. And I thought, we're getting through this information at a hell of a clip as I'm reading it. And I'm also thinking this is really important stuff, because there is an awful lot of, I think anyway, there is an awful lot of parochialism in the way that the Anglophone world talks about our problems with this. And it is definitely a global problem.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I mean, I wrote the book primarily for English-speaking audiences. The publisher is Routledge, so it's a UK publisher. Lots of the sales, I assume, are going to be in the United States. But this is a global problem. Not understanding it as a global problem it's going to make it a lot harder to fight, especially when, even if you are talking about it in domestic policy, in terms of US domestic policy, like they are explicitly excited about and looking at people like Javier Milei, people like Viktor Orban as examples. those are their examples. And if we don't understand that, then like we're not going to be able to fight them. We won't be able to stop them.
Yeah, they have a global view, and a lot of us are failing to have one as well.
Yeah.
We should probably backtrack a little bit, because I'm letting my enthusiasm get the better of me, and introduce the book a little bit. Craig, as I say, is the host of the excellent 15 Minutes of Fascism podcast. Daniel and I were very happy to be guests on that a little while ago.
It was lovely having you.
Oh, thank you very much. It was lovely to be on. And of course, we're returning the favor, not just out of politeness, but also because you do have this book that's just come out just recently from Routledge called How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism. So, Craig, introduce the book for us. Tell us what is the idea behind it?
Yeah, so
I think the title's pretty self-explanatory, actually. But,
I mean, that is one of the benefits of why I titled the book that way. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I studied fascism in my PhD program at UC Berkeley, and I did that because I was afraid of fascism, because I was worried about what was happening in the world. And then when it came time to write a book, when I was done with the PhD, I was like, well, I could write a monograph that's, maybe a couple dozen people will read, which is something that I will do. Or like I could see the writing on the wall and write a book that I hope people will get some real political use out of in their everyday life. And so when I pitched the book, when I wrote the book, when I talk about the book, the way I introduce it is that it's a guide for parents and educators on how to keep young men out of the extreme right wing. I use the word fascism in the title, but I don't want it to be exclusive to, whatever academics would specifically define as fascism. I wanted the book to be about right-wing extremism in general. And so that's what the book is about. That's the tone that it is written in, and that's the level that it's written at. The book is designed, it's written to be readable by people who are not academic experts, and also people who don't listen to the Daily Show every day.
Yeah, well, I noticed you have a pretty broad definition of fascism. This is here on, it's in the book. It's in the first page of chapter 1, and I'll just read it, and I want you to just kind of walk us through that briefly and like why you chose this particular definition. You say fascism, a nationalist, anti-liberal, sexist, and violent right-wing political movement that aims to remake the world.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I wanted
I'm not challenging that, by the way. I'm just wondering, kind of
totally.
Why you use that,
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted a relatively broad definition of fascism, and this is something that is somewhat different from how I posture myself when it comes to like academic inquiry. Like if I was writing for a peer-reviewed journal, I have a somewhat different definition of fascism that is, maybe a little bit more antiquarian, a little bit more siloed, like separating out different varieties of extreme right-wing beliefs. But when it comes to the book, I wanted the definition to be sort of like rough and ready, like useful, like to help people hear when a duck is quacking, basically.
Right.
So all the components of fascism that I distilled in that definition are ones that I think are vital for people understanding what makes fascism different from other right-wing political formations. Its violence and its vision for the future are the two biggest ones that I think a lot of people miss.
Right.
This is especially coming from the United States, where I remember the W. Bush regime and people talking about him as a fascist, and me being like, well, I mean, no, like he's a nationalist, he's a Christian nationalist, et cetera, but like there was nothing like the transformative vision that the fascists have in the Trump coalition. Like just nothing even remotely like it. And I think that the word fascism is useful politically in order to differentiate between those two things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree.
I noticed, I particularly appreciated the inclusion of the word sexist in the definition. Yes. Because I think one of the things that, I mean, and again, I'm not critical. I think this is good. It is a diffuse definition of fascism. And that's clearly, as you read the book, it becomes clear that that's deliberate and it's part of the point, because you're trying to reflect the fact that in 2025, as opposed to 1925, fascism is more diffuse. It is literally more diffused through society, into the internet. It's not as discrete a party phenomenon as it was when it first started. It was widespread in the 1920s and 30s, but it had a much more tightly defined identity than it does now. And I think one of the reasons that some people have been a bit slow to understand that we are dealing with a resurgence of fascism is their very diffuseness. And I think your definition does capture the unity of these diffuse phenomena that are still recognizably fascist. And as I started by saying I appreciated sexist in that definition, because I think that's absolutely key to I mean, it always was, obviously, but I think it's absolutely key to today, to how today's fascism works. And you get into the book because you spend a lot of time on the male supremacism and misogyny, which is inherent to online, particularly online fascism. And you go into Gamergate and incels and all that stuff, which is again at this sort of entry level for the reader who's encountering this stuff maybe for the first time. But I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that especially when it comes to thinking about fascism, a lot of people, and again, especially in the United States, in the Western world, in Europe, they think about fascism as being a political movement that is about racism. And fascism is about racism, but the part that is often missed is its inherent male supremacy, its inherent sexism. And that's one of the reasons that the book is titled the way that it is that fascism is a gendered phenomenon. It was back in the 1920s, back in the 1930s. And, that was partly because fascism as a political formation emerged from the trenches. It emerged from people who were veterans of World War I. Or depending on your timeline, and this isn't the time or place for this, but it's either that or you think it came out of the Ku Klux Klan, which is also a veterans organization, right?
Right.
Either way.
But politics, much more in general, politics was much more male dominated. I mean, it's still male dominated. Don't misunderstand me, anybody. But in the 20s and 30s, of course, it's very much more heavily male. It's on, certainly on the right or on the the mainstream center, almost exclusively male, and on the left too. There's comparatively few women active in party politics and campaign politics.
That's true. So, and when there are women leaders, it's leading a female auxiliary or something like that generally. Although the founder of the first fascist party in the UK was a woman, unusually.
Yes, indeed. But just in terms of the basic makeup of politics,
yes.
At the time when it originates. Whereas now, of course, I mean, part of what today's fascism is reacting against, of course, is the decline of the ability of men to expect that degree of sort of overall dominance in these sorts of spheres, which
exactly.
again is something else you touch on.
Yeah. What I try to convey in the book, and when I talk to people who aren't academics or who aren't professional political observers, people who are obsessed with politics, and they're trying to understand why this is happening, why it's happening now, why are young men like this, why do they like this? The answer that I give is that fascism appeals to downwardly mobile young men. So, people can say oh, well, in the Biden administration, the GDP grew by X whatever percent, or people's lives are better now than they used to be. And you say well, yeah, but when people look at the relative amount of power that they would have had if they had lived in the past, they see that they have relatively less power now. And that is what fascism is a reaction to, in large part. It is white, cis men wishing that they had the degree, the preponderance of social power that they would have had back in the early 20th century, back in the 19th century, or even in the 1950s. In the United States, fascist groups are, when they're making propaganda about what they want, they say leave it to Beaver. They say white picket fence, 2.5 kids, car in the garage, golden retriever. That's what they say they want for people.
Yeah, what an exciting, expansive, exhilarating utopian vision. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. And, ignoring, of course, or I mean, in their case, not ignoring the fact that is founded on women being subservient to men financially, socially, politically. It's founded on racial segregation. That world was founded on those things. And to them, that's not a defect. That's what they want to get back.
Right. And I mean, the book is very much oriented towards how to talk to young people, how to talk to particularly I think arguably you're talking usually 12 to 20 would be kind of the age range that the book is sort of designed for.
Say, yeah.
And I think that's the question I get, I mean, this is weird because the question I get most often from people are not, very often for people is my son or my kid is looking at this stuff and what do I do about it? And my answer, I just never have an answer for it. I mean, it's not that it's like, well, I've given you the tools to understand, what you're seeing, but I don't know how to do this. And I think this book actually does a really good job of sort of like both. It's a very good like fascism 101 for people. First of all, I think the first 3 chapters do a really good job of like, here's what fascism is. Here's what's going on. Here's why young men are attracted to it in particular. And then chapter 4, you go through and you say, okay, here's like specifically what you need to do. Here's what you're looking for. And I think it's a very good, like practical step-by-step thing that I think people can embrace. And, I would have given them, kind of similar advice, but to have a book like this that I could just, literally like hand somebody and say, this is your reference. I think it's invaluable. And I really appreciate the existence of the book. Yeah, so,
Thank you so much. It means a whole lot to hear that. I wrote this book because I've had those conversations too,
yeah.
You meet people at dinner parties, you meet them at bars, you meet them wherever, and you tell them what you do, and they say like, well, what do I do? Like, my nephew's saying this shit, my son is saying it, kids in the class I teach are saying it, like, what am I supposed to do? And first of all, I wanted to have an answer for that. And I'm an academic at heart. I knew that I had to write a book if I wanted to figure out the answer. And so this was how I did it. And the answer that I arrived at was one that I found uncomfortable at first, because I'm a proud anti-fascist. I believe that fascism should be stopped in its quest to take over the world and oppress people around it. And as such, I believe that fascism needs to be fought. We need to combat it in the world. We need to confront fascism when it is trying to take over space and power and political organizations. But I also know we're talking to an individual person at home, around the Thanksgiving dinner table, a friend at a bar. Like, yelling at that person is not going to change their mind. In fact, it will probably do the opposite. And so I thought to myself, well, like, who could I possibly ask to hear out a fascist when they're talking about their beliefs? Who could I possibly ask to hear this kind of garbage, like evil nonsense, and experience and show empathy? And I was like, well, it's only parents, educators, relatives, loved ones, community members. Those are the people that you can ask to do that. And it's a tall order. It's hard work.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we've had, people like let's say Daryl Davies. Yeah. And some of the like sort of like, I just go and have conversations with random Ku Klux Klan members and like really like, yeah, what you've done is, you've allowed yourself to be used by them for propaganda purposes to the degree that you're literally, you're literally testifying as a character witness in their trials.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not good work, and so like confronting people like strangers and kind of like trying to like have that debate that way is counterproductive. I think we would agree on that. But I absolutely agree that like if it is somebody that you have like an actual relationship with, especially a close relationship like a parent-child or a family member or even an educator or whatever, as you say, that those are the people who actually can reach out. Like me as a nobody with a podcast, I can't talk to somebody and like convince them, even though I know how they're feeling about as well as they do, because I've consumed probably more of the material than they have, but without that like really close personal connection, you just really can't, you really can't convince somebody, you really can't get to somebody's soul the way you can. And so I think, again, I agree like 99.9% with everything that's in the book. It's it's basically the same thing that I had kind of come to, and to have it like in this like distilled form, I think is going to be really useful for people. So
I really appreciate that. That's we were laughing about earlier on, we're in some dark times.
Yeah.
And we can laugh about it in an attempt to shield ourselves from that, but it is really hardening to feel like you've done something useful. And I mean, you two do something extremely useful every time you put out this podcast, helping people understand what's going on. I think when we talked last, you also, talked about hearing people giving feedback about how hearing an outside perspective helped them, steer away from falling down the abyss. And yeah, I mean, that's the work. It's uncomfortable. It's hard. When it comes to a loved one, that's a situation in which a person can can show this kind of like radical empathy, but which is nevertheless principally concerned about safety, right? The first advice that I always give is like, well, yeah, like if your kid is actively threatening other people with credible threats of violence, like, okay, yeah, it is not time for empathy now. Now it is time for safety.
Right.
But assuming that you are safe, assuming that the other people in your community are safe, other children you have, other young people in the community, people who are disproportionately targeted for violence by fascism. So that's people of color, queer people, immigrants. Assuming that those people are safe in this scenario, then it's time to be like, just show the same kind of empathy and curiosity that you have for, whatever other crap a kid is into. You say like, yeah, I mean, like literally, like
fascism is the new Pokemon. Yeah.
I mean, for some 12-year-olds, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree. Like Andrew Anglin, like deliberately targeted people. He like wrote in things. I'm targeting like 13-year-olds.
Precisely. Like, yeah. Anglin is one of the principal villains of this story.
Yes, no, definitely.
He's
one of the few who are actually name checked in the book. You name check
yes.
Anglin. You spent a lot of time with Andrew Tate as well.
Andrew Tate is somebody who has been in and out of the limelight since I started writing this book. But the fact is that he has taken up the mantle of the biggest like misogynist influencer that's around these days.
Yep.
And this is despite or because of the fact that he is charged with human trafficking, sexual assault, and numerous other crimes and financial crimes, not just in Romania, but apparently also like they're looking into doing some prosecuting in Florida, where he is currently hiding. I mean, it's nuts. I think the thing that really, really got me was I researched for this book. I heard about an educator who was saying like, yeah, I have heard on my elementary school playground an adaptation of the rhyme "One, two, buckle my shoe" that includes the words Andrew Tate. That it's 7, 8 Andrew Tate, 9, 10, et cetera, right?
Right, yeah.
And so like, the 6-year-olds who's saying this rhyme doesn't know who Andrew Tate is, or maybe, they know he's some guy, right?
Right.
But they know that their 12-year-old brother likes him, or they know that their 16-year-old brother likes him, right? And so he's just infiltrated the zeitgeist of young people, and it's terrifying, like, oh my God, it's hard to think about.
Yeah, no, there is a for such a short book. It's 135 pages excluding notes. The survey it takes of the present moment is really impressive. You pack an awful lot into those 135 pages. From influencer culture, Joe Rogan, to Alex Jones, the soy and estrogen scares, and you go right the way through it.
Oh my God! I had a friend read the book, and they texted me that they were in a cafe and laughed out loud at the testicle tanning part.
Yeah.
They were like, I missed that part.
How can you not? And that was like mainstream on Tucker Carlson. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
God. I mean, that's one of the things that is, I know that you two deal with this, that like one of the hardest things about telling people about this stuff is that it is just so goofy and dumb. Yeah. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It has two modes, and they are goofy and gut-wrenchingly horrifying.
Right.
And that's on purpose, right? They did that on purpose in order to make it feel like a joke, read like a joke to people who aren't paying attention. And I think that was one of the principal things I was trying to convey in the book to parents, especially, is to be like, this might sound like a joke. Your kid will treat it like a joke, but it is not a joke. This is the content, right? This isn't just like South Park gross out humor stuff. Although that is the gateway for it, is intentionally using the fact that young people, and especially young men, at least in the contemporary Western world, tend toward a kind of like South Parky kind of exaggerated transgressive humor.
Right.
And using that as a gateway to actual fascist content. And Anglin is a perfect example of somebody who's literally on record saying, oh, yes, we can exploit this in order to get fascism in front of young people's eyeballs.
Yeah, no, I mean, he just out and out said it. Like, you don't have to, like, he's like the Chris Ruffo of that. It's like, he just went out and said, this is the thing I'm doing. And then he goes out and does it. And then people look at him and go, what, do you think he's actually doing this thing? Yes, no, obviously he's doing this. I'll tell you one of the funniest, like one of the like horrifying but funny things that I ran into early on that, was a song by a guy named Roscoe Jones, who Roscoe was, I don't think the Third Rail is still producing episodes, but it was one of the TRS affiliated podcasts. This had been in 2017 or so, like that era. And they did a parody version of the Rainbow Connection, the Muppets song. And they did it as the Hebrew Connection. And it was about how we need to annihilate all the Jews.
God.
Hello, everybody. Jack from the future popping in briefly at Daniel's request to correct a little mistake there. It wasn't actually on the Third Rail that the song appeared, but rather a podcast called Exodus Americanus, just for the sake of accuracy. And back to the discussion.
I mean, that's one of those things I just never I would never play the audio on this podcast or anything, but like it was pretty, like it's just pretty gross. And they use that kind of like that transgressive humor. They use that kind of, we're taking something that's like literally made for children and we're turning it against itself, and we're turning it into something that's, ennobling in their eyes. Obviously it's not ennobling, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. And like in the book, I ask parents to, you have to make a complicated calculation here. Like, the fact is that young men are interested in transgressive comedy. And so it's possible that when your kid says a racist joke or something like that, he is testing the waters and he doesn't really believe anything, or he's not connected to anything yet or anything like that, right? But that is the way that slippery slope does in fact go. Like that's one of the ways it can go. And so you have to react to it carefully and seriously and say like, oh, I don't understand what's funny about that. My algorithm doesn't show me those kinds of things. Where does it show up in yours? What other stuff is going on where you encounter that kind of stuff? Like, what do you find appealing about this? Or like, how do you think people who are different than you would feel about hearing this thing? And, to not let them stand behind the shield of it's just a joke because I'm living in a country that is currently ruled by an unelected bureaucratic organization that is named after a meme from like 2012. Like the jokes are not jokes; they're real.
Yeah, it's essentially, the Gamergate aesthetic is in the process of executing an internal coup in the American government.
God, what a sentence!
I mean almost literally. My God,
Yes, yeah. I mean, you imagine talking to some of these guys in like 2012, 2015, 2017, and talking to them about where this is going to go. Like, I don't think they would believe you.
I mean, I continue, even though we produced fewer episodes lately, one of the things that I'm going to be doing is kind of revisiting some of the old topics that we've done and some of the old figures and saying, here's what they're saying now in 2025. Because it's just, they were like, they're literally seeing the Trump return and the Doge and all this stuff. And like, it's like, well, we're going to set aside that Trump is still ruled by the Jews because they still see him as being ruled by the Jews because he isn't like actively anti-Israel. Right. But they're like, this is more than we ever thought we were going to get. Like, this is, we wouldn't have thought we could get this in 100 years. And, they've just won, it's just one of those things. And I don't know, maybe that's something does the advice in the book, like if you had to, I understand this was just released, but if you had to write this now, knowing the era that we're in, what advice might change for you? Because one of the things that you do, and we could talk about this, is that you kind of pitch the book as like, this is not just for progressives, it's not just for activists, it's for conservatives as well, because the United Front, the Popular Front, is going to be important to combating this, and I don't disagree with that. But I think when Donald Trump can kind of phrase himself as like, well, I'm just kind of a regular conservative guy, when he's the president of the United States, like it mainstreams this stuff in such a way that it's harder, I think, again, at the 101 level, at the level that, we're kind of pitching this book to, that you pitched the book to, how do you differentiate between that and like a Bill Kristol or something?
Yeah. I mean, I think that if I started this book now, the main thing that I would want to add in there or possibly change is to help parents understand that 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 this isn't some sort of like fringe game or something that your
Right.
child might be involved in. Like, this is not a behavioral issue. To really understand that this is an entire social political world that your kid could extremely realistically think of as a future for him. Like, now that Donald Trump is in office, and if he continues to be extremely successful at the things that he's wanting to do, it's very possible that like the only government institutions that will be hiring for anything at all in the coming years will be like fascist type initiatives, like Doge, like other sorts of like prosecutorial roles to go after Democrats, to go after other perceived enemies of the Trump administration. And so like helping parents understand that if your kid gets into this stuff and he says like, well, this is where my future is, he might be right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, you know, we were talking earlier about, you know, fascist parties back in the 30s, like that was a career path. Like, that's bread and butter. That could just be your whole life. Like, and it really could.
This is where the example of Horst Wessel that you bring up quite early in the book is so instructive, because that's, I mean, that could be today, you know, just change some of the terminology.
Oh yeah.
He found a career in what turned out to be the Nazi takeover of Germany. I mean, it just so happened that it got him killed, and he was then co-opted as a martyr for the movement. But yeah, he's a template.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that often gets missed in instruction about fascism in the 1920s and 30s is just the like, I mean, it was just popular. Millions of people liked it. I think that one of the reasons that people have such a hard time understanding what's happening now is that we believe that fascism is something that is done to populations as opposed to something that populations do to themselves. And like, I know that, you know, none of us here operate under that illusion, but like most people do. They think that fascism is something that happens. It's like a disease or a cloud that like envelops people and spaces. And, you know, people even talk about this, and people talk about it in those terms. Like, you know, like people talk about like it as if it were an infection that was spreading around Europe. And they talk about it that way today, when it's like, no, it's an intentional political project, just like any other one. And like millions of people simply do support it.
And it appeals to people like for a reason.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I often, you know, I kind of make the, you know, the sort of my, you know, gut reaction to this is like fascism is like short circuiting like leftist goals effectively. Is that like there are problems that leftists want to solve, you know, income inequality or, you know, healthcare or whatever, you know, whatever. But, you know, the solution to those problems, so the problems of capitalism, end up needing to be solved by like very long, grueling, hard work of like actually correcting injustices that involves a lot of like both internal and external work. Like you have to work on yourself and work on the world around you. And fascists say, no, it's the Jews, it's the black people, it's the women, it's the trans people, it's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they just like short circuit that. And it's like, well, of course I'm going to go for the easy answer, right? You know?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly.
And it's the left as well. It's the people who are telling you that, you know, it's a long, hard, difficult road to solve these problems. They're the problem. They're telling you that for a reason. You know, I mean, one of the things I really appreciated in the book is that there is a refreshing degree of honesty in the book, I think, which does contrast with a lot of conventional pieties that I think people try to. Some people anyway try to run away from acknowledging some of the difficult stuff. I mean, you say in the book, you know, fascism has been around for about 100 years. Within the confines of that period, it has been normal for young men to be attracted to it. That you know, it is not an abnormal thing. It's not the Empire in Star Wars. It has, for 100 years now, it has been a political movement, you know, with ups and downs, obviously, that it has been normal, to a given value of that word, for young men to be attracted to. It is the truth that white cis men are less powerful. They have less privilege. They have less social prestige now than they used to. The left does, in fact, advocate taking power away from white people and men. You know, we can't. If we're going to continue to be on the left, we can't sort of shy away from that, because that's when they pounce, when you flinch. You know. you refuse to shy away from Antifa. There's a great bit where you and it's a bit that stuck out to me as a moment where the approaches of the book really come together, because the book is it's quite conversational in places. It's aimed at, as we say, at this sort of entry level reader, this person who's maybe getting into who's reading it because they're concerned about a family member. You're introducing a lot of new content. And then you get to the bit where you talk about Antifa and you explain that it's this diffuse movement of all sorts of different ideologies and all sorts of different approaches. And you say, you're reading this book because you're concerned about somebody in your life that you think might be falling into fascism. Congratulations, you're in Antifa. I really appreciated that approach.
Yeah, I wanted to do that, like you said, partly to be honest about the nature of the conflict that the Western world is in, and also, yeah, to break down the biases, the stigma, the misunderstanding about what Antifa is. Like, yeah, of course there are like radical anti-capitalist anarchists that are in Antifa. Back in the 30s, there were monarchists who were anti-fascists. Like right. all you have to do is not want there to be a fascist dictatorship. You can be a liberal Democrat. You can be a communist. You can be a libertarian. Like, yeah. I definitely want to get at what you were mentioning just a little before that about being honest about the fight, about being honest about the problem, which is that fascism is simply appealing to young men. Like, not only does it intentionally seek out young men, like it appeals to them, like the verb, but it is appealing to them because it talks about the world in a way that they can understand. Anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools, right? As the man said. And there's a reason that it works. This is a propaganda tool that has worked for over a century, well over a century, centuries. And when it comes to young men and telling them about the world that they have been born into, especially young cis heterosexual white men or men who are belonging to whatever the majoritarian ethnic religious group that is in their country, so in South Asia, this is Hindus. In the United States, it's primarily Protestants, although radical Catholics as well, depending on where you are, it differs. But when you talk to them and you say like, yes, in fact, yes, what the left wants is for you to have less power over society than your grandpa did. That is, in fact, what we want. And if you're talking to a 16-year-old who, A, has never experienced social power, at least in the way that adults do, and B, has a brain that is not done and like actually incapable, on a statistical level, like on a population-wide statistical level, incapable of thinking about risks and systemic factors in the same way that adults can, like, of course that person is going to be like, what? Excuse me? Like, I haven't gotten anything and you're going to take it from me?
Yeah.
Fascism comes to that young man and says, that's right, they're taking it from you. Who are they? Well, it's communists and Jewish people and black people and women. Everybody who is not like you. You've never gotten your due. You deserve it. The world was better in the past, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a much easier pill to swallow than like, try really hard and maybe we can keep global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. But that's the struggle. That's the fight.
Only part of Florida will be underwater if we really, really work at it,
Exactly.
But that's, I mean, that, if that's what you're saying, then that's contemporary society being reasonably good. I mean, contemporary society, I think, is incredible. I think another great moment in the book is where you point out that, to young men, or at least to a lot of young men, this sort of transgressiveness that you find in fascist culture online, it's cool. For want of a better word, I think is what you write. It's cool. And yeah, I think the reason that it's cool is because so often the gap between the sort of conventional pieties and the reality of society is so visible, and we're not going to get this done by insisting upon the conventional pieties and just say, don't see the gap. No, they do see the gap. We do have to face some of this stuff head on.
Yeah. I mean, the issue with the fact that fascism is just cool and popular is one of the biggest problems in trying to take a young man off of that ramp, because if you prohibit it, it just becomes cooler, like in the same way that don't do drugs programs often result in kids doing more drugs, or scared straight programs end up in higher incarceration rates. which is something that I learned when doing research for this book.
Or
if
like
you make
anti-gay programs where you like put a bunch of like
Yeah,
gay
exactly.
kids in a,
Yes.
you put a bunch
Yeah.
of gay kids in a room together and you force them to be straight, and what happens overnight is not what you
Exactly.
would expect, you know? Like,
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
it's
so like
it's just come to me. A lot of left approaches amount to a kind of secular left version of abstinence-only education when it comes
That's
to
true.
fascism.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The idea is that like, well, all we have to do is tell them not to. And like for adults, yeah, I mean like that's I think that is what you should be doing, you know, like if your uncle is saying some racist crap and you know that you're not going to get to him, you can either make a boundary and say like, hey, I don't want to talk to you anymore, or you can make a different boundary and say, hey, I don't want to talk to you about this anymore. And like you can leave it at that. But when it's a child, I believe that adults are morally obligated to help them not become Nazis. And just telling them what not to do, like you remember when you were a kid, you loved doing stuff you weren't supposed to do. So instead, well, I was a goody two shoes, so that didn't really apply to me. But lots of kids, right? That's the big challenge, is like, how do you make this something that they know is bad and wrong, but which doesn't have the allure of things that are bad and wrong, like the allure of the transgressive, which is another big component of it. You know, they know that it's something that everybody who has power over them doesn't like. And that is simply appealing to a lot of teenagers, adolescents.
Yeah, that leads me on to another thing that I really appreciated about the book is the fact that it faces head on what could be seen as a disjunction between the advice that it's giving specifically to people working with young men, and the what you might call, I suppose, the wider social tactics for the adult world. There's a bit where you talk about the phrase, "It's not my job to educate you." And you say essentially, yeah, I agree with that I mean, I might be mischaracterizing you. If I am, put me right. But you say essentially, I agree with that in the public adult context. But what we're dealing with here, I mean, talk a little bit about that difference between tackling these things on that wider social adult level and tackling them what I think is the key distinction you make on the private one-to-one family level.
Yeah, that was the aha moment. That was the answer that I needed to write the book to understand, at least to understand my perspective on it, was that if you want to stop fascism in public, there are a series of tactics that you might follow, and there's lots of books and guides and historical examples of how to do that, right? But when you want to fight fascism in the private world, the rules are different, you know? You're not talking about like social aggregates, you're not talking about political messaging, you're talking about like a person that you know intimately, or who you're related to, or who you have an ongoing relationship or situation with, or like who you are dependent on, or who is dependent on you. And so in the public sphere, fascism is a political problem. Private sphere, fascism is not just a political problem, it's a personal problem. And you have to sort of treat it that way. And yeah, when you mentioned the like, you know, it's not my job to educate you about my oppression, or it's not my job to educate you about what you're doing that is hurting me. I think that that's perfectly valid. You know, like it is certainly not the job of any given oppressed person to educate their oppressors about what is going on. That's in the public sphere, though. In the private sphere, if you know someone, like, who else is going to tell them? Like, it might suck that you have to, but who else will? And given what is happening in the world, like, we're just going to have to step up and do a lot of uncomfortable, difficult stuff. I know that me saying this from, you know, my subject position, I'm a cisgendered white guy in the United States, that means that there are certain aspects of that I don't have to deal with. But at the same time, it's like, people are going to have these conversations with these young men, people that I believe that they could credibly be, you know, asked to listen to, are the people that they're already listening to about stuff. That's what we got.
I mean, to the degree that they are still listening to
yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
you know, that's the thing, is that the deeper they get into it, the less they're going to listen to you at all.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, yes, it is unjust that people who are affected by this rhetoric might be it might be necessary for them to do some of this educating, to provide some of this empathy. But I literally don't think there's an alternative. Like we don't have a state anti-fascist propaganda regime. We're not going to have one.
I don't think definitionally that can exist, honestly. But
Probably not. Yeah.
One of the things that I like both about the book and about your podcast is something that I'm very bad at, which is covering fascism in the rest of the world. And that's because I'm like, look, I'm a horse with the blinders on. I look at like this one thing that I know really, really well. And it's not that the rest isn't important. It's just that's somebody else's job. And you do that other work. You do look at fascism around the world, and you include many examples in the book from, parties in India, from parties in the UK, from parties in Germany and Italy, Brazil. But also in your podcast, you're often like covering, not just kind of USCA and fascism, but, fascism around the world. I'm wondering if you would speak a little bit to that and kind of what your perspective is on that, and, just why.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to ask why, but you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, so in my PhD, I studied fascism or right-wing political movements, some of which are fascist and some of which were not particularly fascist or not quite fascist. My PhD was about extreme right-wing organizations in South America. So Chile, Argentina, Brazil. But these people are international, just like fascists, just like the right wing today. And so they were connected with all these guys in Europe, in the United States primarily, but also with, anti-communist organizations in Taiwan or Japan or, South Korea. And so I think that I have just, the way that I understand the problem, it just is a global way that I understand the problem. And so sometimes this means that, my apology centrally is usually that I don't know about that many trees, but I can tell you about the forest.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a different thing than the kind of expertise that you have and the kind of expertise that the two of your podcast provides. Instead of a deep dive, it is more of a like, hey, here's the lay of the land, encouraging you to find and go into sources that are about your particular country or your particular worry or the particular thing that your kid is into, because that was one of the other challenges when writing the book was like, I started drafting this book in 2022. I knew that I couldn't be like, hey, here are the big bad YouTubers now, because I'd be like, well, by the time this book is published, no kid is going to be caught dead watching those guys, right?
Right.
Andrew Tate has had some more legs, but I knew that wouldn't be the case. And so one example of that is PewDiePie, I mentioned in the book, as like somebody who was a big name, I don't know, like 5-7 years ago, that at this point is like the kids today who are watching YouTubers and getting weird, transgressive, extremist content on it, they might not know who he is. Or they think about him as some sort of like grandpa influencer,
Yep. That's my dad's influencer. Thank you.
I mean, it might literally be.
I mean, it might be. Yeah, no, absolutely.
But yeah, the global perspective thing, I just simply think it's the only way to think about it, especially if we're talking about European examples of fascism, like Giorgio Meloni's Italian movement, that is deeply involved with other European right-wing movements. The United States is looking at Hungary, it's looking at Argentina. Where does Millet look? He looks at Austrian economists and, like the Chicago boys and stuff, right?
Right.
Like these people have a global movement. And I think I wanted to study the right wing globally because I came into the academy, I came into university to get a PhD, and I saw that there wasn't the same amount of rigor applied to the extreme right wing that has been applied to the left over the last 50 years. Over the last 50 years, there's been, since the 60s, there's been an extremely large and very wonderful amount of scholarship about leftist ideas and organizing, and like those are really beautiful books, and a lot of really wonderful careers have come out of that. But like there just isn't the same amount of attention given to the bad guys, right? And that was what motivated me. I wanted to treat them as the terrifyingly legitimate objects of study that they are. And then this book was an attempt to translate that into something that was popularly useful.
Yeah, no, I agree. And a 400-page treatise on Argentine fascists in the 1940s is probably not going to be as effective at this as your book is. Yes,
Although that might be the next book, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and I will read it for sure. I will be fascinated.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. I was listening to the Political Cesspool this morning. Before I picked up your book. I don't know how familiar you are with that podcast, but that's a Southern Nationalist podcast. We actually covered it in like episode 8 or something like that, like way early in this podcast. We covered it. But it's a weekly listen for me. Usually I do it on Sundays, but lately I've been letting it slide and just doing it whenever I get around to it. But every March they do a march, what they call the March Around the World series. This is actually a radio program broadcast out of Memphis. It's a guy named James Edwards, who worked for the Ron Paul campaign back in like back in the 2000 Ron Paul campaign. And eventually founds this radio show. They've now been running for 20 years. But they do and it's like a Southern Nationalist, like a very like pro-Confederate show. But they definitely have, they do a little bit of Holocaust now. They tend to like shy away from that most of the times of like the anti-Semitic stuff. But the last year or two, they've really been embracing it more and more, and not doing the wink, wink, nudge, nudge on it, but just talking about like the Jewish influence, etc. It's amazing that even gets broadcasted. There's a long story behind that. I'm going to have to recover that at some point. That's a fascinating podcast. But I mean, it's very boring to listen to, but the history behind it is kind of fascinating. But one of the things that they do in March is because they do like 3 hours a night, and so they bring in 3 hours a week on Saturday nights, and they bring in a different person from a different country. So a different fascist from, somebody from the UK, somebody from Australia, somebody from Brazil, et cetera, and, integrate into like our conversation about Southern nationalism, about white nationalism in America versus, kind of what people around the world are saying. And, so there are like definite links, and they do get along. They're copacetic on so many issues.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things I've been hearing from even the international guys, even these, even just kind of listening to them for an hour a week or whatever, they're very enthused by what's happening here under Trump right now. Like it's a huge deal, So
oh yeah, I mean, people are excited, and like the unfortunate truth is that like they have every reason to be excited.
Oh yeah,
First of all, I wanted to thank you both for having me on. It's always lovely talking to both of you, despite the subject matter. Yeah, so the book is coming out with Routledge Press, so you can get it at the Routledge website. If you are in the United States or the UK, you can also check in with a local bookstore and ask them to order it for you. It is on Amazon, but don't order it on Amazon. Just get it from Routledge straight away. If you are in the United States, you could also ask your local library to buy a copy and have it there. And also, I want to say that if you are a member of a parenting group, like a PTA or something like that, and you are interested in having me talk about the book, I would be glad to. You can reach me at howtotalktoyourson@gmail.com. And my podcast, 15 Minutes of Fascism, is wherever you listen to podcasts. So you can just Google that, and it'll come up.
It's a really great listen because it is like quick bites. It's like bullet points, for a while.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's the idea. Is that it's something that this book is a short book because it's a parenting book essentially, and parents don't have a huge amount of time to read books. And when I was first making this podcast, I was like, man, the purpose of this podcast is so that I don't talk the ear off of, like a partner or a friend. And so I was like, okay, let me just dump it all in 15 minutes. And everybody's got 15 minutes for fascism, right? So,
well, it's a good concept, and it works well. I listen to it regularly. So
thank you.
Yeah. Podcast highly recommended. And the book is highly recommended as well. How to Talk to Your Son About Fascism by Craig A. Johnson from Routledge Press. I really do strongly recommend it. It's short, but it's packed with information. It's very informative. It's very accessible. It's a great sort of primer for anybody really, but particularly with the advice, I think, for somebody who does have to talk to a family member or a young person, particularly obviously a young man. If I had the money to do so, I would be buying crates of these, and I would just be distributing them to school libraries. Not that we have those anymore in Britain.
Yeah, thank you so much.